The island of Newfoundland keeps its secrets close, shrouds them in mystery. But once in a while, the fog is lifted, the truth comes out.
I get a feeling there's something going on here. My whole body was shaking.
You go to bed believing that you're a certain person one night, and then all of a sudden the next day, everything that you've known is not true.
This is not the life that I should have lived.
I'm Luke Quinton from CBC. This is Come By Chance. Available now.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
All right. Hey, Jordan.
Hello, Steph.
How are you?
I'm doing well, getting over a summertime bout of COVID. But I'm excited to be talking to you because this is like our last day of school before summer vacation, kind of.
Yeah, that's the vibe. Before we get into all that, I wanted to ask you to guess how many episodes we've done since we first started the show last year.
Are we counting episodes like this one or episodes like The Big Story, or are we only counting something in this economy?
All episodes on the feed.
33.
Oh, you're so close. 32.
Oh, okay. That's pretty good.
When I read the number 32, it felt like we had done way more. Like I was shocked. That felt low.
Yeah, it actually does feel low. So I feel like we talk about the ideas for these episodes all the time. And many of them don't come to fruition. So that's why I think it feels like more. Yeah. We've done more work than 32 episodes.
Yeah, maybe that's it. But like you said, we're heading into summer and things are kind of winding down around here. So it's kind of a good time to pause, reflect on the show and talk about what's working, what's not. So I have some feedback here that we can kind of go through and just talk about what's next for the show.
We can do that. I also want to solicit more feedback right off the top. Okay. Usually I leave it till the end of these episodes, and I know some people stop listening as soon as it seems like the credits are about to roll. But as we think about what we're doing on this show over the summer, we really need to hear from the people who like it. So as you listen to this episode, if you have thoughts on what we should do, you can, as always, if you've listened to the end of the show before, email us. The address is hello@itepod.ca, or you can call us. The phone number is 416-935-5935, and leave us a voicemail. I slip into like some weird robotic voice whenever I do those call-outs.
I know. I feel like it's because you do it so often, so I don't blame you.
I can't help it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Anyway, let's get to the feedback.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you ready to get into some feedback?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this first one on the list is a message we got from Brian. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he basically just describes feeling house poor after refinancing his mortgage a few months ago. And
I'm about to be there, Brian.
Yeah. And he just lists like very specific numbers about his situation, how much he's paying in expenses, what the new terms of his mortgage are. And then he asks us for advice about what he should do. First of all, I'm so grateful to Brian for writing in, and I appreciate all the details here because it takes time to kind of put that all down into an email. So super grateful. But I bring it up because, Jordan, you and I have been debating a lot about just the direction of the show and wondering if we should be getting super granular with our advice, like Brian is asking, or if we should just zoom out and focus on the larger issues at play within those situations. So, like with Brian's email, we might zoom out and talk about what happens when you break the terms of a mortgage and how much you might have to pay and, just the things that you should consider before you do that. So, Jordan, do you want to just talk about where we've landed kind of in those debates and why and what we're going to do going forward?
Yeah, it's a great example. And I don't know if we've actually landed firmly on one side or the other yet. But this is the thing, and we'll talk about this a little more, too, because we have somebody who was picking at some holes in one of our guests' pieces of advice, which is totally fair. But it's a question of what we want this show to be. And I think the part of it that I love that makes it meaningful and even helpful to me is providing the context that explains how we ended up in this situation and how we ended up with these problems and how to attack them in a way that can hopefully be as relevant to as many listeners as possible. As I've said a few times, I'm not a financial expert. Like, I'm not even close to that, judging by the fact that I've had my own problems aired out on this show. It's very clear that I'm not. And our guests come from a wide range of expertise. And often the person who understands the systems at play and the history of them best is not the person best equipped to give really granular and personal advice that makes a real difference to the person who wrote in, like practically. And one of the reasons for that is because this is a huge country and finances differ from province to province. Rules around landlords and tenants, for instance, or realtors, or all sorts of things differ from province to province. Rebates on electric cars differ from province to province. And so one person is not going to be able to speak to all Canadians in that hyper-specific way. I think what we want to do is make sure that the content we're providing is something that deepens everyone's understanding about that financial situation. And often that will help the person who wrote in, but it's probably not going to tell you to, yeah, you should take $15,000 out of this account and invest it in this place and then maybe refinance your mortgage with this bank and et cetera, because first of all, we're going to screw that up from time to time if we try to do that. And second of all, like 3/4 of the people listening would be like, well, that's great if you're in Alberta, but here I am. So it's a fine line to walk, and we're going to try to walk it. But if I had to be honest, I would say I would always err on the side of providing context and understanding over providing direct financial advice.
Yeah. And like you said, we are, walking the line. We haven't landed in an exact place. So if you think we should take the show in one way or the other, please write in and let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, this is where I want to know how we can be most useful to people, honestly.
Yeah, that's our number one goal. And that kind of leads us into this next piece of feedback, which is a nice review we got from an Apple Podcast listener who wrote, "No tricks, no secret, get rich tips, just normal, important financial literacy topics." And I think that sums up what we were just talking about quite nicely. So that was really nice to get. Thank you. Okay. Next, you mentioned this kind of in your last answer. I want to address a few concerns we received from our episode about RSPs. So this is kind of an example of a scenario where we zoom out on a topic after we got really specific questions from a number of listeners about RSPs. Off the bat, I want to just acknowledge that our guests did make some mistakes and they were not caught in the editing process, which is on us. And some incorrect information was released, unfortunately.
But we updated it.
We did. Yeah. We published a correction and a disclaimer on the episode with some helpful links to get information that you need. But Jordan, can you walk us through like how that happened and what we're trying to do to minimize it?
Sure. I mean, I did kind of just talk about this, but and I did it in a long-winded way, so I will keep this one brief. But I'm not an expert, like I said, so I'm not equipped to know when a guest is really straying off topic or saying something wrong. And, there's myself, there's you, there's a couple of our producers who all look at this afterwards. And if we book somebody that has certain credentials, we expect them to be able to deliver advice commensurate with those credentials. And it's one of those things where maybe we should have a disclaimer on every episode that says, we're not licensed financial advice people. Go talk to your broker, go talk to somebody at your bank, et cetera, et cetera. But rather than doing that, I would rather provide stuff that we know is accurate and we know will be helpful without saying, do this specifically and have potentially a guest steer somebody wrong.
Yeah, I think the important takeaway is we're not giving financial advice. We're just kind of explaining topics, trying to point you in the right direction, but you should always do your own research and reach out to a professional.
Yeah, this is financial awareness, context, and understanding. This is not what you should do with your money. There are plenty, if that's what you're looking for, there are plenty of podcasts done by financial planners and money nerds who will give you very specific instructions on how to do specific things. What they won't do is give you the larger context of what's going on here and who's responsible for it and how it could be better and why you're suffering like this. That's what we're trying to do and make you feel a little better because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, totally. Okay, before I read this next one, I just want to preface it by saying I thought we were going to get way more complaints about this episode, but we didn't, and I'm a little relieved about it. Jordan, can you guess what episode it is?
Is it the landlord episode?
Yeah, it is.
I love doing that episode.
Yeah, I thought it was really great. I mean, like, I think a lot of people have that question, especially when home prices are so high and salaries are not rising at the same rate as inflation. So people are looking for ways to supplement that huge mortgage cost. But there obviously is a lot of contention around the word landlord. So yeah, I was happy that we got into it. I'm glad we did the topic, but I definitely expected more hate mail.
I think if we're going to provide the context that I've just spent the last 10 minutes talking about, we have to provide it from all sides of the financial equation. And like, I don't know, landlords like our guest, like they're no different than somebody at a job who is, you know, a middle manager who, yeah, is probably making a little bit more than the people under them, but is also making way less than the people over them and is trying to scrape by, albeit with a leg up that comes from already having that property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like bridging the gap between both sides. But I brought it up because we did get one person writing in. They said that they had to turn off the podcast because the guest was insisting that a $75,000 income is, quote, not very much in this day and age, and that reeked of privilege. They went on to write that the average salary of someone in Toronto, according to Google, in the 75th percentile is $76,791. We have not fact-checked that. But I want to say, you know, to be fair, I think the guest meant that amount of money, $75,000, just doesn't go far these days. And I would have to agree with her. It really doesn't. But regardless, I just want to touch on why we mention salaries if we do, because we're actually not doing it as much anymore.
Well, I think people, first of all, have been very hesitant to share them, probably exactly because of complaints like this, right? Mm-hmm. There's always people that have it worse off to whom your salary sounds like, how dare you complain? You're making X $1,000s more than I am. But one of the reasons we started this show is because as we covered the economy more and more on The Big Story, it quickly became pretty obvious that, like, there is a very high threshold for people who are simply not at all struggling to get by these days, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody who's making $75K is probably, hopefully, struggling less than somebody making $45K. On the other hand, like, there are a lot of people right now who make, let's just say, $90,000, lots of money. And 5 years ago, they bought a house because $90,000 could get them a mortgage with a small down payment. And that mortgage is now coming due. And they are, for all practical terms, not going to be able to afford that house. And they will be going into debt every month to service the mortgage, or they'll be looking to rent that place out and go live somewhere they can't afford. Like, there's a wide spectrum of what struggling means in this economy. And that's why we started this show. And so I would encourage listeners not to judge a guest solely by their income, but to listen to which areas of the economy they're struggling to navigate and see what you can take away from that. Because I think that's been the biggest eye-opener that I've had since we began starting this show, is just like everybody with the exception of the top 5%, 10% are facing various challenges. And I think it's really interesting to hear about the ways in which this economy can kind of suck you into thinking you can afford something and then all of a sudden hammer you over the head. And like, that's the reality that we live in today. And so to that person, $75K is probably not a lot of money. even though it might seem like it to you. And so, I don't know, like, what am I trying to say? Have some empathy, man.
Yeah. And, like in school, I don't know what's being taught exactly right now in schools, but when I was in school, like financial literacy just wasn't taught. And all the information that I got was from my parents. So yeah, I think no matter how much you're making, you can still have money issues because unfortunately it's just not taught, not talked about as much as we would like it to be.
Sometimes people with a higher income are not as good at budgeting for tough times because they haven't had to and weren't taught financial literacy. And if you're not doing smart things with it and you're not planning, then it doesn't really matter how much money you have. It can all just slip through your fingers.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to our final piece of feedback. So this is a note we got after our episode about the importance of estate planning. This episode was named Die in This Economy, which I thought was great. But anyway, this person wrote, Indigenous people living on reserves also have another step in the will process. It needs to be approved by Indigenous services. My uncle passed away without a will, and it has been a challenge working with Indigenous services settling what he had. So I didn't know about this step, and our guest in this episode didn't mention it in the interview, but I'm really glad that this person wrote in because I think we can do a better job of trying to include, the Indigenous perspective when it comes to financial issues in Canada. So thanks for this reminder. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing to put on the list for next season.
Yeah. So on that note, Jordan, what can we share about, what's coming next for In This Economy?
Well, like I said off the top, we're taking a summer vacation. We've been producing this show for quite a while now, and we've got a lot going on this summer at Frequency Podcast Network, and we're going to focus on that. And we always plan to take a couple of months in the summer to analyze where the show is, how far we've come, how people have responded to it, what we want to do next with it. And we will be in the process of doing all of that. And then we will be back at the end of the summer. And I will leave it to us and to the feedback we get from our listeners to determine exactly how different, if it's different, this show is come the fall.
Perfect. And the feed is not going to go dormant. We're going to occasionally pop stuff up on there. So stay listening.
And especially if there's big economic news and stuff that really might impact how you are planning for the fall or how you're going to manage your finances for the next year. Stuff like, we did a breaking news episode on the interest rates being cut. So that's a good example of something that, we will still try to get you timely information on when it happens. It's more the bigger picture financial literacy type episodes that we'll be working on behind the scenes till the fall.
Yeah, perfect. So stay listening, keep your eyes on the feed, and we'll see you in the fall. Thanks, Jordan.
No, thank you, Steph, for doing such a great job running this show. And thanks to our awesome producers who have also worked on the show, Allison Broverman, Marshall Whitsid, Ali Graham, and of course, our amazing sound design team who make this show sound so good. And thank you to all of you who've listened to this show, especially the folks who made it to the end of even this episode. You're the people we make it for. We want your input on it, and have a truly great summer. And we'll talk soon.